It was a brisk Monday morning in downtown Chicago, the kind that started with gray clouds and the scent of rain clinging faintly to the breeze, a day where people rushed past each other with half-zipped coats, coffee cups in hand, and the kind of worn-down expressions that made you wonder what silent battles they were carrying inside. And in the middle of all this hustle, Maria Alvarez stood on the train platform, her breath visible in the cold air, her hands buried deep in her worn gloves. Trying to keep warm as her mind raced with anxiety over an upcoming interview that meant more to her than words could say. It had been 7 long, painful months of unemployment, of rejection emails, of telling herself she was still enough even when the world seemed determined to prove otherwise, and today was her one real shot, a final interview at the City Heart Foundation, a nonprofit she deeply admired for its work with underserved communities, a job that aligned not just with her skill set, but with her soul. But already the day had started with bad omens. Her alarm hadn't gone off, she spilled oatmeal on the only good blouse she owned, and she missed her regular train, which forced her into the next one, more crowded, more chaotic, more suffocating, and as she squeezed into the jam-packed train car, barely finding space to stand, she kept telling herself, just get through this, even as her heels pinched her toes and the strap of her old leather bag dug into her shoulder, and then, halfway through the ride, the train screeched to a halt, jolting everyone, and that's when Maria noticed her. A frail elderly woman, hunched over with a tote bag in hand and eyes that darted anxiously from seat to seat, her thin body swaying slightly as she tried to steady herself against the jerky movement of the train. People around her barely glanced up from their phones, pretending not to see, absorbed in their own bubbles of hurry and silence, and Maria felt that familiar tug in her chest, the one her mother used to call the voice of the heart. She didn't hesitate, just gently tapped the shoulder of a man sitting in front of her, squeezed past him, and offered her seat to the old woman with a soft smile and a nod. The woman looked at her, startled for a moment, then overwhelmed with gratitude, her lips trembling into a silent "thank you," as she slowly sat down, clutching the armrest like it was a lifeline, and Maria thought little of it, returning to her corner, her feet already sore, her stomach a mess of nerves, and her thoughts once again drifting to the ticking clock. 8:13 a.m. and counting. She had barely 15 minutes left and still 3 stops to go, and her mind started racing through everything that could go wrong, from getting lost on the way to saying the wrong thing in the interview. Her palms were sweaty, her heart pounding, when suddenly a calm voice interrupted her spiral. "Excuse me, miss," said a man beside her, dressed in a neat coat, salt and pepper hair, and eyes that studied her with quiet intensity. "I saw what you did just now, giving up your seat," and she blinked, unsure whether to respond, nod, or retreat, but he continued, "That woman you helped, she's my mother," and Maria's eyes widened in surprise as he smiled warmly and pulled out a sleek leather wallet, flipping it open to reveal a business card. "David E. Collins, Executive Director, City Heart Foundation." For a moment, Maria couldn't breathe. The very place she was interviewing at, the person she was about to meet in less than 30 minutes, was standing right beside her, and he had just watched her perform what she considered a simple act of decency. "You're interviewing with us today?" he asked, and she nodded, voice barely above a whisper. "Yes, in 15 minutes, he chuckled gently. "You're the last interview on my list today. I hadn't seen your face until now. But I've seen enough," he said, and the sincerity in his words felt like a wave crashing against years of quiet struggle. The train pulled into the next station, and they got off together, walking side by side as he asked her about her story, her background, her passion for community work, and with every word she spoke, something inside her began to heal. They entered the tall glass building together, bypassing the front desk where she was meant to check in, and she sat down across from him in a sunlit corner office that somehow felt warmer than anything she'd known in months. The interview flowed like a conversation between two people who shared a common purpose, and by the time it ended, David leaned back in his chair, smiled, and said, "I think we've found the heart we were looking for." And just like that, she had the job, a miracle born. Not of her resume, or her degree, but of a moment of compassion that most people wouldn't have noticed, and over the weeks and months that followed, Maria's life began to transform, not just in the form of a paycheck or a stable routine, but in the way purpose started blooming in her. She mentored teenage girls who had grown up in foster care, helped organize food drives for struggling families, and coordinated workshops that gave people not just resources, but hope. And every so often, she'd catch herself remembering that morning on the train, when everything seemed to be falling apart, and realize that's when everything actually started falling into place. The job became more than work to her, it became her mission, her redemption, her second chance. One afternoon, she walked into the Foundation's community center and saw a teenage boy standing alone, nervous, unsure, and she approached him, asked if he was okay. He said he was thinking of dropping out of school, said no one ever believed in him. Maria smiled, handed him a flyer, and said, "I used to think the same thing. But someone gave me a chance. Now I want to give you one too." And in that moment, she saw herself in him, scared, unsure, but still holding on, and she knew this was where she was meant to be. Years later, at a Foundation gala, David introduced her as the heart of the organization, and as she stepped onto the stage to thank the team, her eyes scanned the crowd and landed on a familiar face, the elderly woman she had given her seat to, sitting in the front row, smiling with tears in her eyes, and beside her, David stood beaming, and Maria, her voice shaking, said to the audience, "Sometimes, it takes just one moment to change everything. One act of kindness. One decision to put someone else first. That morning, I gave up my seat. And in return, I found my calling." If you ever wonder whether kindness matters, let me tell you, it does. It can open doors no resume ever could. It can restore faith when all you've known is rejection. It can remind us we're not invisible, we are seen, we are valued, and we are connected by more than just circumstance. We are connected by compassion, and the applause that followed wasn't just for her. It was for everyone who had ever held the door open, shared their meal, lent a hand, or simply looked at another person and saw not a stranger, but a fellow human being. And as Maria stepped down from the stage, hugged the old woman once more, and looked around the room filled with people whose lives had been touched by the Foundation, she felt a deep, unshakable truth settle in her chest, that the smallest acts often echo the loudest, that even on the hardest days, goodness still flows quietly among us, waiting to be passed forward. And as she walked home that night, beneath the streetlights and the spring breeze, she whispered a quiet thank you to that younger version of herself, the one who stood up on that crowded train, not knowing that her whole life was about to change.